Imagine this. You're trapped in a frozen desert. Nothing but endless white snow in every direction. So white it stops being beautiful and starts feeling terrifying. No food, no shelter, no sign of rescue. Just silence and the cold breath of death creeping closer. This is the story of October 13th, 1972. Uruguay's well-known rugby team, the Old Christians Club, was flying to Chile for what they believed would be the biggest match of their lives. They thought they were heading toward a game. They had no idea they were about to face something far greater: nature itself. Inside the plane, it felt like a celebration. Young players laughing, confidence in the air, family members smiling, every face glowing with hope. But as the aircraft crossed the towering Andes Mountains, everything changed. The weather turned violent. The pilots realized too late that warm air currents and icy mountain winds had collided. The plane began shaking violently, like a paper boat caught in a storm. One passenger tried to calm everyone. "It's going to be okay." But that day, okay was never an option. Suddenly, a brutal jolt. Laughter turned into screams. Luggage flew through the cabin. And then, a deafening crash. The aircraft slammed into a mountain. The impact was so violent the plane split in two. The rear section was torn away, carrying several lives with it. The front half slid down the snowy slope like an out-of-control sled before finally plunging into deep snow. When it stopped, the silence was worse than the crash. Seats were crushed together. Some passengers were killed instantly. Others were buried in wreckage. When a few survivors regained consciousness, all they saw was smoke, blood, and shattered dreams. Those who could move began pulling others from the debris. Two medical students immediately took charge, doing everything they could for broken bones and deep wounds with almost no supplies. A few men rushed toward the cockpit hoping for answers. There were none. The pilot was dead. The radio was destroyed. They were truly alone. They stepped outside and screamed for help. The Andes answered with echoes, as if the mountains themselves were whispering, "No one is coming." The night fell, and the real nightmare began. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like blood was freezing inside their veins. To survive, they turned the broken plane into shelter. They sealed gaps with luggage, used whatever they could find to block the wind. That first night felt like the end of the world. Shivering bodies pressed together for warmth, silent prayers. One question in every pair of eyes: will we live to see the morning? Morning came, but it brought new bodies. Some had not survived the cold. The survivors understood something brutal and clear. If they wanted to live, they couldn't just cry. They had to fight. They created a small camp inside the wreckage. The injured were laid out in the sun. They searched every inch of the plane for food. What did they find? A few pieces of chocolate, some bottles of wine. For dozens of people, it was nothing. Then suddenly, the sound of an airplane overhead. They ran outside in desperation, waving, screaming. But the aircraft disappeared into the clouds without seeing them. Hope was buried again in the snow. On the third day, something unbelievable happened. Nando, who everyone thought was dead, opened his eyes. When he realized what had happened, shock filled his face. He stumbled toward his sister, who was hanging between life and death. He didn't know it yet. This was only the beginning. The real test was still ahead, and the real question remained: could any of them escape this white hell alive? The story grows even heavier from here. Nando had just regained consciousness. His body was shattered, his mind was numb. The first question he asked was simple: where is my mother? No one answered, just lowered eyes and a thick, painful silence. It didn't take him long to understand. His mother was gone. In that moment, his face hardened like stone. There were tears in his eyes, but no time to cry. He thought of his aging father back home, probably sitting in peace, believing his son would return after a rugby match. But here, the real match was between life and death. And now, a new enemy emerged: thirst. There was snow everywhere, endless snow, but eating it directly would lower their body temperature even more and could kill them faster. So they improvised. They placed snow on pieces of broken metal from the plane and let the sun melt it. Drop by drop, they collected water. They laid suitcases out in the snow to form a giant X, hoping the plane overhead might see them, hoping for a miracle. Then, one day, through the clouds, the sound of another airplane. Everyone ran outside. They reflected sunlight using pieces of glass. They screamed. They waved desperately. When the plane slightly tilted, they thought, it sees us. But the next morning, the distant sound of aircraft engines came from far away. The search was happening somewhere else. They were still lost in the white wilderness. Humanity versus hunger. A week had passed. The last piece of food was gone. No trees, no animals. Nothing but snow and empty stomachs. The hunger became unbearable. Some began chewing on shoelaces. Others put cigarettes in their mouths just to trick their bodies into thinking they were consuming something. And then, Nando said the words that froze everyone in place. If we want to survive, we'll have to eat the bodies of those who have died. It was as if time stopped. Arguments exploded. That's a sin. It goes against our faith. How could we even think about that? But hunger doesn't recognize religion. On the 8th day, Nando's sister died. Death was no longer distant. It was sitting among them. By the 11th day, conditions were so desperate that some survivors said quietly, "If I die, use my body. At least let someone else live." Those words were not easy to say. They were even harder to hear. With trembling hands using shards of glass as tools, they carried out the decision that would haunt them forever. 5 people still refused. But hunger slowly breaks down every wall. Then, inside the wreckage, they found something unexpected, a portable radio. It felt like a beam of light in total darkness. After improvising an antenna, they waited, holding their breath. Maybe good news, maybe rescue. But what they heard shattered everything. After 66 unsuccessful attempts, the search operation has been terminated. All passengers are presumed dead. That was it. Officially, they were dead. At least in the eyes of the world. The 5 who had refused before lowered their heads in tears. Now they were no longer just people stranded in snow. They were shadows fighting for survival. But giving up, that was still not an option. 3 young men decided to climb the mountains to search for the tail section of the plane. Maybe they could find working radio parts. Maybe a miracle. The journey was brutal. The altitude made breathing painful. Icy winds cut across their faces. Along the way, they found the bodies of friends who had been thrown from the aircraft during the crash. Snow blindness blurred their vision. Eventually, they were forced to turn back. Day 17, everyone was sitting inside the wreckage, telling stories to one another. The laughter was fake, but necessary. Then, a deep rumble echoed from the mountain. At first, faint, then terrifying. A massive avalanche roared down the slope. In seconds, the entire plane was buried beneath snow. Darkness, air growing thin, screams. It felt as if nature itself had decided. This test was far from over. The story had now reached a point where it felt as if nature itself was openly playing a deadly game with them. A terrifying roar echoed across the mountain. It was as if the entire range had come alive. And in the next second, tons of snow exploded into the plane. Everything happened in moments. Those closer to the surface began clawing at the snow with their bare hands. People were shouting names. Some were crying. Others were desperately searching for a friend's hand in the darkness. Somehow, they managed to dig almost everyone out. But one woman, she suffocated beneath the snow. Before they could fully catch their breath, another wave struck. This time even worse. The team captain and several brave survivors were buried forever beneath that white blanket. Now they were truly buried alive. For 2 days, they remained trapped under the snow-filled wreckage. Darkness, thin, suffocating air, and the fire of hunger burning inside their stomachs. When the hunger became unbearable, they were forced to confront the truth they had tried to outrun. They ate the flesh of the same friends they had laughed with, the same faces they had known so well. It was a decision that didn't just wound the body, it shattered the soul. Numa was broken by it. Overwhelmed with rage and helplessness, he began digging wildly through the snow with his bare hands. A shard of glass sliced his foot badly. Blood poured out. He barely noticed. But his obsession, his refusal to quit, paid off on the 20th day. A thin ray of sunlight pierced through the wreckage. An opening. Days passed. But death did not stop. On the 34th day, Coco died. In his hand was a letter filled with emotion, as if he had already known his end was near. On the 36th day, Roberto, Nando, Tintin, and Numa made a decision. No more waiting. They would find their own way out. But Numa's foot had become infected. The infection was spreading through his body. Still, he refused to surrender. He told the other 3 to go ahead. Go, try. And they returned with what felt like a miracle. They had found the tail section of the plane. Inside, they discovered cigarettes, chocolate, and most importantly, radio batteries. Everyone held their breath. The batteries were connected. The radio crackled to life. Hearts pounded, but no response. The silence that followed was heavier than ever. Numa's condition worsened. He knew his time was ending. To save food for the others, he stopped eating. Every bite he could have taken, he gave away. In one final attempt to repair the radio, it short-circuited. And the last fragile flame of hope went out. Day 58, word reached them that the Air Force might send another plane. But Roberto and Nando were done waiting. That freezing night, Numa spoke words that could break anyone's heart. After I die, use my body, so you can make it home. The next morning, Numa was gone. In his hand was a note. There is no greater sacrifice than giving your life for your friends. His words became fire inside Roberto and Nando. Fear was fading, anger was rising, and the determination to return home burned stronger than ever. They made their choice. They would either embrace death or tear through this white hell and claim their freedom. Now, this was no longer just about surviving. It was about going home. Numa's sacrifice lit a fire in the veins of the survivors. Giving up was no longer an option. Roberto, Nando, and Tintin made their decision. They would either find a way out or die trying. They stitched together a makeshift sleeping bag from waterproof fabric, their only source of food, and they began walking toward the setting sun, west toward Chile. The very first night, a snowstorm struck. The wind sliced across their faces like blades, but that handmade sleeping bag became their shield. Without it, the journey might have ended right there. After days of climbing, they finally reached the top of a massive peak. Hope filled their hearts, maybe signs of civilization, but what lay before them crushed their spirits. An endless ocean of white mountains, as far as the eye could see, nothing but snow. The ground seemed to vanish beneath their feet. Food was limited, the path was endless. Then Tintin made a decision worthy of a hero. "I'll go back to the crash site," he said. "You two keep going, take my share of the food." Nando's shoe tore apart. His feet sank into freezing snow with every step. Roberto grew so exhausted he began vomiting from weakness. But Nando refused to let him fall. "Don't give up," he said. "We've already left death behind us." And they kept walking. Slowly, the white snow gave way to brown rock, then dirt. And then, in front of them flowed a river, the sound of life. On the other side, they spotted a man on horseback. Nando waved wildly. He screamed with everything he had, but the roar of the river swallowed his voice. The rider didn't understand, and he left. Their hearts shattered once more. But the next day, the horseman returned. He wrapped a piece of paper and a pencil around a rock and threw it across the river. With trembling hands, Nando wrote, "We are passengers from the airplane that crashed in the mountains. Our friends are still alive. Please rescue us." When the man read the note, he wasted no time. He rode off to get help. The rescue mission had begun. Back at the crash site, when word arrived that 2 of their companions had been found alive, hope ignited again. Even in hellish conditions, they prepared themselves. They combed their hair, straightened their clothes. They didn't want the world to see victims. They wanted to be seen as survivors. Day 71. The sound of helicopters echoed through the sky. This time, that sound didn't bring fear. It brought freedom. Nando and Roberto guided the pilot toward the crash site. When the helicopter finally landed, the sight was enough to break even the strongest heart. 16 skeletal survivors clung to each other, sobbing uncontrollably. They had made it. Once they reached the city, everything changed. Camera flashes, reporters shouting questions. Hospital beds, they were safe. But their minds were still trapped in those mountains. On their first night in the hospital, they couldn't sleep in the soft beds. The memories were too loud. The cold, the darkness, the screams. Eventually, they lay down on the floor together. Just as they had in the Andes, 16 of them returned home. But a part of them remained buried in those mountains forever. They still carry a debt to the friends who sacrificed themselves, so that this story could be told. This is not just a story about a plane crash. It is a story about human will, about friendship, about sacrifice, and about hope. The kind that refuses to die, even in the darkest night. Now tell me, how deeply did this story move you? Would you like to hear another true survival story that sends chills down your spine?